So looking at a query that will get information from a text box in a form, first thing that we need to do is we need to have the form with a text box for the user to type in. Before we even, apart from knowing what it is we want to search for, before we start doing anything with the query design, we need to start off with a blank form. Now, you can work in the layout view. I prefer to work in the design view for this. Set all of the properties up with that. Make sure that you've got like the background sorted, color themes and everything in there. And then the functionality bit that we need. You want to put a text box into the form. So that's the second button in. And if you're in layout view, if you just click it, will put a text box in. If you're in design view, if you click and drag, you'll be able to make the text box the size that you want it to be to start with. And you get two bits. You get the text box itself, which will come up and will say unbound. That's the bit where the user will enter the data. And then you get the bit that says text, and usually a number after it. So this one says text 0. And that is where you put in the label that the user will see for the text box. So in this case, I'm searching for a fish name because that's the easiest thing I can think of. I'm going to put fish name in there because that's what the user will see. And then I'm going to click onto the text box that says unbound. And then to do the next bit of this, we need to put in the property sheet. So if you've got a property sheet showing, it's easily recognizable by the large amount of rows that it has in it. If not, find the button that says property sheet, or you should be able to press Alt and Enter to open the property sheet, and make sure you've got the text box selected. The name, and this will bring up this property sheet here. Now you can go through, you can do formatting. There's a lot of different settings and options in the property sheets that you can put in there. The only one that we're interested in for doing the setup of a query is the name and the label. And for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to put fish search in both of these. Now, if you're doing this properly, you would go through and you would name and label everything to something that's easy to find. So this one has a name of label 1. You would change that to fish name label, so that when you're looking at stuff later on, and if we were to go on and do some coding in this, we would be able to identify the different elements of forms easily. But for the purposes of setting up a query, all we need to do is get the unbound text box, and okay, apparently it doesn't like being labeled fish search, so I'll just leave, of course, label name links to that, which is label 1. So the label 1 is the label for that. And so change the name to fish search because that is the important bit, and then save the form. Give it a sensible name. As you will see, I'm sticking with fish search all the way through this. Now that the form's created, although we don't have any buttons or anything on here to run the query, we've got the first step set up. We can't add a button to run a query at the moment because we don't have the query that we want to run. So we need to go back to the Create tab, and this time we want to go into the query design. If you don't have an Add Tables box showing, press the button for Add Tables. You may get a pop-up, or it may come up docked on the right-hand side. Doesn't really matter which one you want. Just make sure you select the tables that have the information in that you need for the query and add the selected tables. Don't just go through and add all the tables. If the tables don't have information you don't need to add them. Select the fields that you want to show. So I've only got 2 fields really in this that I want to show. Don't need to show the ID field. That's not going to mean much of anything to someone who is searching for a fish. So I'm going to add in the fish name, which is what we're searching for, and the fish gender. And then we get to the probably most complicated bit of this query, and that is the criteria. And so you can see what I'm typing. I'm just going to put the magnifier on and magnify this screen. So in the criteria, we need to tell the criteria that we want to get input from somewhere. Now, we could just get input from a user, and to get any kind of input, rather than what I would call a hard-coded criteria. So hard-coded criteria would be, say, to make a query that has equals, speech marks, and then whatever search term you're looking for. That would be hard-coded. The user has no influence on that. That won't change. In order to get some user input into a query, we use square brackets. Now, we could just do square brackets. That will give a prompt for the user to enter the information they wish to search for. We could put text in the square brackets. So enter fish name, and that will give us a pop-up with the fish name showing. But we don't actually want to do either of those. We want to tell the query to get the information from the form that we've just made. And to do that, we still use the square brackets, but the first thing we do is we set up a first level of the search to search for the forms. So I've put in square bracket with an F, and I can now select forms from that lookup that comes up. So the criteria is coming from the forms. Exclamation mark then tells us to go to the next level down. And the next level down is to select the actual form. This is why saving the form is an important step. If you haven't saved the form, your form will not come up as a selectable option. Select the option, select the correct form that's got the text box in that we've just done, and just double click on that. The final bit is we need to tell the query where to look in the form for that information. So an exclamation mark to break it up again, and this is where naming that text box was so important, because now we're at the bottom level of this form and we've got the fish search in here. So we can double click that and that will put that in. And that's what the final criteria will look like. If you were doing a search where you wanted to pass criteria from one or another text box or from 2 text boxes, it's exactly the same layout, only you would put the second one into the OR row. So the second one would go into that OR instead of being in the criteria. If you put it in the criteria, you're doing an AND search. So rather than search for a specific, say, fish name or a fish that is a specific gender by putting it in here, and being able to leave one or the other blank and get the results that you wanted, if you put both of these criteria into the criteria column, criteria row, sorry, not column, the forms if you didn't put in a search in the second text box, it would bring out any search results that have no information in, because there's nothing there telling it what to search for. And because it's an and search, you'd be searching for, say, the fish name and no gender. So unless that field was blank in the database table, you wouldn't get a result. So you do need, for a searching for and or an or option, to put any further criteria into that or column. And that's the query setup. That's the second step. So now we need to save this query. So let's save the query. Right click save, seeing how Control S doesn't appear to want to play this morning. Add it to the list. And keeping things named conventionally so that they go together and look like the same thing. Let's call the query fish search, because again, we're still searching for the fish. The query is there. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to close that query down and come back to the design view on the design tab for my form. And now I need to add a button, because at the moment, all we can do is type in this box. So we're going to add a button to add functionality. In the miscellaneous, we are going to run a query. So we've put the button in, we've selected miscellaneous, we've selected run query. I've only got one query. If you have more than one query, make sure you've got the correct query selected before you press next. You can use you can use the sort of pre-built in pictures if you want. I'm just going to set it up so the button, when it says search for the user, we give it a sensible name so that we know what it does, and then press finish. And then to test this, we need to put the form into form view, and fairly sure I have a fish called Bob. So I'm going to type Bob into this text box and press the search button. The query is opened. Bob has now been returned. If I close that query and I search for, what even is, Jill. Jill is my other fish. Search for Jill. There, Jill has come up with her gender. And that's how you would set up a query to get results passed to it from a form. And make sure you save everything so that you aren't losing any of this information.